Texas State Democratic Representative James Talarico has just announced his bid for the U.S. Senate. And this is something that was maybe expected, at least for anyone who pays close attention to Texas politics. Talarico has more of a national profile than most state-level representatives do, particularly because he keeps going viral. He's a Christian Democrat who regularly fights Republicans for their efforts to mandate more and more Christianity in the lives of everyday Texans and Americans. He's a fighter for the separation of church and state, and as a practicing Christian, he is an important voice to have in that fight.
The seventh commandment is, "Thou shalt not commit adultery."
Yes.
Do you think that members of the legislature should focus more on trying to follow the Ten Commandments rather than telling others to follow them?
Maybe they didn't have them posted.
It is incumbent on all of us to follow God's law.
He's also made plenty of national press appearances, as he was one of the Texas representatives who fled the state to break quorum whenever the governor was redistricting our state in the middle of a decade. He also had a very successful appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, and from that experience on the podcast, he was able to reach all kinds of people, voters in the state of Texas, that he otherwise might not have been able to reach.
All I'm pushing back on is that second step of it's always going to be this way.
Right. It doesn't have to be this way.
That is the key step.
Right.
So
I'm that's because you need to run for president.
Yeah.
We need someone who's actually a good person.
But heading into the 2026 election, Texas Senator John Cornyn is up for re-election, and the clamor for his seat is getting louder and louder. So just to give you some quick background, if you're not familiar with John Cornyn, he is the less headline-grabby of our two Texas senators. The other, of course, and unfortunately being podcast host Ted Cruz. So Cornyn is more representative of the more typical Republican, the kind of Republican that other Republicans who voted for Trump 3 times but still somehow don't see themselves as full MAGA more identify with. So that said, Cornyn does vote with Trump and the administration nearly 100% of the time, and that is a point that all of his political ads that are running locally are really highlighting. And perhaps the biggest reason that particular stat is being blasted everywhere is because Cornyn is being primaried by another Republican, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton is the highest law enforcement official in the state, but he regularly finds himself in violation of the law. Not only that, but he has had members of his own party here in Texas threaten to throw him out of office, and they nearly did. And they would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for our meddling lieutenant governor. Anyway, Paxton is objectively terrible, but he is a Trump shill, so he's running on that and he's actually winning. And his biggest attack against Cornyn is that Cornyn is not MAGA enough. According to Ken Paxton, Texas needs an even more MAGA senator, even more MAGA than Ted Cruz, who is so down for the MAGA cause that he constantly sucks up to a man who has insulted both his wife and father. But back to Talarico, he joins former U.S. Representative Democrat Colin Allred in the fight for Cornyn's seat. So Allred ran in 2024 for Ted Cruz's seat, and he obviously lost that race. Allred had been polling nearly neck and neck with Cruz all the way up to election night, and then he lost by nearly 9 points. So by comparison, Beto O'Rourke lost to Ted Cruz also in 2018, but he lost by less than 3 points, which is an interesting commentary on the left overall. At the time, Beto O'Rourke was considered to be radically left, especially for Texas. And yet, he managed to swing a significant part of the Republican voting population to his side by meeting them where they were, literally. He visited all 254 counties in the state during his campaign. By contrast, Allred he is much more liberal than he is progressive. He's a typical Biden Democrat, and he takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from AIPAC. No big deal. The campaign he ran last year was, in my opinion, very annoying. It felt like I was blocking a new campaign phone number from him at least once a week. And at the end of everything, I can't really tell you much of what he stood for. He was just not Ted Cruz, which ultimately was not enough of a reason for people to turn out and vote for him on election day. And if he had Juan Cruz's seat, he certainly would have been an improvement on Ted Cruz, but he wouldn't have been someone that I would have seen as a fighter for me or for my rights. I voted for him, but I'm not particularly happy about that vote or even proud of it. Beto's goofy, but actually he supports his community and the state. He puts his money where his mouth is. Even recently, he was helping to raise money for the state representatives while they were out of state, and he's not even holding office right now. By the way, Senate candidate and current AG Ken Paxton actually sued Beto O'Rourke over his efforts to raise money for these Democrats, and he tried to have him thrown in jail. Beto countersued the AG, but that is still ongoing litigation. Paxton, as I said, is objectively the worst. So the tale of these two Senate elections here in Texas is one that progressives have been telling for a very long time, and that is that people do not and will not respond positively to mid-centrist politicians who don't really stand for a whole lot, but they will go for someone who actually at least seems like they want to better the lives of their constituents rather than maintain a status quo that just doesn't work for so many people. And in my opinion, that is exactly why Beto performed so much better than Allred did. Although to be fair, it's not an apples to apples comparison. 2018 and 2024 were different times, and an unprecedented number of unprecedented things happened between those two elections. Still, in the grand scheme of things, 6 years is not that long of a time at all. And even with everything that did happen between 2018 and 2024, the Dems still have not learned, or more realistically, they haven't yet conceded that centrism and passivity does not win elections. They still don't even really fully acknowledge why Kamala lost in 2024, because acknowledging why would mean that they would have to do something about the things that they acknowledge. They would have to acknowledge the overwhelming lack of support for our nation's funding of genocide in Gaza, for example. For that matter, they would have to acknowledge genocide in Gaza, which even Bernie won't do, because the minute our government acknowledges it, our government is actually obligated to do something about it, and that is not something that they are prepared to do. The Democrats would also have to acknowledge that platitudes don't work to trick people into supporting their mediocre candidates anymore. They would have to acknowledge the fact that Americans are less forgiving of billionaires and big business than they once were. These are things that the Democratic Party is not willing to part with just yet, so instead they run candidates who say nice but vague things and make overly generalized promises to the public, and these are promises that they may or may not even attempt to deliver on. So the Dems have people like Chuck Schumer leading them, whose idea of governing and fighting for the American people is to fight for the people of Israel, while sending Donald Trump strongly worded letters of disapproval filled with pleas for the president to just behave better. The American people need and deserve better, and I really do believe that a lot of this starts and even ends with what happens at the local and state levels. And here in Texas, we have got incredible Democrats. Not all are great, of course. We have a lot of dinos here. We have a lot of Democrats running who are like, you know what, I served in the military, I support guns, but I'm running as a Democrat. So we have a lot of, a lot of lines that get blurred here in Texas. But even that said, a lot of the Democrats that I even met personally are so much better than some of the Democrats that I've seen even at the national level. And that is no accident. I've said this before, but to be a Democrat in the state of Texas, you have to be good. You have to be qualified. You have to be at the top of your game. You have to be ready for anything. You have to be ready to fight, because the fight will find you, and you have to be ready to fight against people who are less smart and less qualified than you, but they are backed by more money than you, and they're supported by people who have a cult-like dedication to their side. In Houston, for example, there is a special election coming up in November for a congressional seat that our governor has let sit vacant for months already. And while I don't live in this particular district, if I did, I would have a hard time deciding who to vote for. I mean, I know who I personally would vote for, but my point is that there are a few Democrats in that race who I would be more than happy to have representing me. And hopefully that is kind of what James Talarico can bring to the Senate race. He's somebody who I would actually be excited to vote for in 2026, especially I can't vote for Colin Allred again. I already did it once. I can't give you a second vote, all right? That's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.